how bad do we want this? Is probably the question.
What?
I know. So this is take two
Take
of
two.
episode 2, and you get to the end and you realize nothing is recorded. And we felt like we absolutely nailed the shit out of that thing. Covered all these topics, so what we're going to try and do is recreate those topics or those ideas, hopefully make them better or more succinct or, don't know. And maybe like order it slightly to keep myself entertained and maybe you guys entertained, or to see where they lead, or it could be a completely different podcast.
Yeah.
Who knows? But it is like this case of like Goggins of like, how bad do you want this? Like, it was like, it wasn't even an option. I was like, Julian, we've got 2 options.
Yeah.
One, we wait 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And like go again, and you're like, yep. I was like, okay, there isn't even a second option. So like, is what it is.
Yeah, it's part of like getting the reps, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe that could be the starting question of like, how do you feel right now? Like after that first
Annoyed.
take disappeared.
Frustrated. Like, it is incredibly annoying.
Yeah.
But it's also the question of like, why are we doing this? Or why am I doing this? Like, why am I sitting on this seat and like spending a public holiday chatting to you to have to do like 2 of the same podcasts basically? And it's like the enjoyment of having the conversation of, my initial thought was like, how do we actually recreate the same conversation? But that also isn't the point. It's like, okay, how do I reframe it to make the most out of it? And how do I actually make this better? Like, how do we make it a better podcast again, which is the point of like doing the thing, executing on the thing, and not saying we want to do the thing because it's nice and we want the outcome.
Right.
Is the way I'm like trying to process it. Like I have. It sounds like an emotional drama on my podcast. Damn me. How are you feeling about it?
A little bit like disappointed. There's definitely that, but also maybe more so excited that I get to continue the conversations, which so far have been like super fun. So ready to go again.
Yeah, it was also definitely my fault that all the mics like failed. I didn't do all the checks. It's all the mics and stuff are moving now, and so it's cool to explore, because I feel like Julia is way more keen to be like, I could go 3 hours. Let's make this a marathon.
3 hours, 30 minutes. Let's go.
And so like, I think to come back, I think we talked about the marathon to start with last time, but we'll make that at the end, so that I really do think there's value in it. But I think part of the reason why I started running and we both probably started running was like, definitely me, you'll be able to tell me, confidence, or like an ability to prove something. And I think the big question you asked was like, where do you feel like confidence comes from, or what is the idea of confidence? And it feels like I'm just saying it again and again because we already covered it. But it's like, confidence is a thing that a lot of people want, and is also the reason why people want is because they get people progress further or have success or have more friends or relationships or whatever it is because they're more confident. And confidence is a very vain external metric in the sense of to exist and to exhibit it, basically. And so whether or not you're looking for a true internal confidence or an external view of confidence depends on how you go about it and approaching it, and whether one leads to the other, and how to actually create confidence.
I wonder then, if you were to approach someone on the street who outwardly doesn't appear confident, how would you then gauge the internal sense of confidence?
It's a good question. We didn't ask this one before, motherfucker.
This is off the script.
I think it would take time to see their level of trust in opening up and vulnerability in the conversation of whether it takes 1, 2, or 3 conversations to know how internally confident they are, and if there is an area of their life that they do have confidence. Whereas I feel like most people would have one particular area whether it be really important area of their life or externally important area versus internally important. For example, could be terrible at girls, terrible family, terrible friends, but just dominates a game, like a video game or something like that.
Right.
Alternatively, like really good at football, really good at business, really good at relationships, whatever, has lots of friends, has minimal amounts of friends, close friends, to try and understand where they get their confidence from. I think you'd have to start on some of the external metrics. Do you feel like people are more confident or generally as a whole or less confident?
Well, I think one thing you mentioned earlier was like everyone wants to be confident. I think that's seems to be true. To me, that cultivating or building upon that internal sense of confidence is way more appealing than developing the exterior sense of confidence. Perhaps one downside or the shadow to that approach is like things aren't as visible as they could be, and maybe then,
And it takes a while to see it. Like it's it almost like it'll exist at a certain point. Then when it becomes real, it becomes like very real, as like a level of confidence or a level of knowing who you are and showing up for who you want to be. Whereas there is that whole idea of act as if you're who you are.
Yes.
You know, pretend until it becomes real.
Yeah.
Which I think definitely does have merit, but I think you can't do that all the time, or at least you have to have some process to work on fulfilling the back end of that, to actually creating evidence.
Yeah. It's interesting also like to think about role models.
Yeah.
You know, like would you mimic the person who is less outwardly confident or more outwardly confident? And the instinctive answer that comes to my mind is like it's easier or more desirable to mimic the person who is externally confident because that's what everyone wants.
I think that's where you'd start to question. Like you'd actually start to question the person who is externally confident to understand whether they have an internal level of confidence. And to see whether that's congruent versus it's like you want to follow what's in front of you first rather than trying to look at the other way. Doesn't mean the other person who isn't exertly confident doesn't have an internal level of confidence, but there is more likely it's a classic case of like if you hear hooves, is it going to be a horse or a zebra? And so I love this quote. I got it from like James Smith of like, you know, what is it actually going to be? More likely than not, when you hear a hoof in this like reality, it's going to be a horse. But like if you're in Africa, it's going to be a zebra. Or like occasionally it is a fucking zebra. But like it's pretty rare, especially in Melbourne at this point in time. And so it's a case of who are you trying to be? And then the more you go down that rabbit hole, figuring out whether they are or they're putting on a persona of it. And then really, if they believe that they are, do they actually have evidence to that?
Yes.
Or are they even bullshitting themselves into a belief that they are confident in an area?
That's an interesting one.
So coming back to the example that I said last time, watched a YouTube video. It's okay, I'll retell it as if I really care about telling it to you for the first time. There was like this YouTube video about like talking like absolute smack. It was a lie detector test, and they're just asking each other stupid questions. And it was, they asked him, do you reckon you're good in bed? And he was like, yeah, I think I'm good in bed. And the guy answering, like doing the results of the lie detector was like, he believes he is. And I was like, for like a shit, like bullshit video, this is deep as fuck. And no one else probably in the show might not have realized just how deep of an answer that was. Because this guy genuinely believed that he was good in bed. We can't prove it. I mean, like you go down the path, but what's the point? And so it's like, he obviously genuinely believes he is, whether he is or not in reality,
Yeah.
you don't know, and it doesn't matter. But like he actually believed it.
Yeah.
And so some people can have a false sense of belief, almost like a Wolf of Wall Street-esque false sense of belief of reality to create it in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like there's like the first impression, and then there's like the underneath, the layers that lie underneath. But it's like someone can be externally confident, and maybe the real test or the questions to ask is to suss out like how much depth is there to that exterior. Yeah.
Yeah.
What sort of questions would you ask?
I know. I think it'd be as simple as like asking, where do you get your confidence from, or what do you find most interesting, or like where are you building that? Do you have like a level of self-awareness of your own confidence?
Yeah.
Because I think I've worked on a point of view of becoming more confident or externally confident. The amount of times that I don't feel confident and have this external representation of being confident from multiple examples. I'm like, there obviously is somewhere that I have to keep building like a sort of a level of evidence or competence in a certain space or feeling. I think it's probably like a case of like, what are people's behaviors?
Yes.
And like, why do they have that behavior in the first place?
Yeah. I think there's merit to like faking it till you make it, in that it gets you moving. Then the real test is like, is this person doing the work that is necessary to actually back up that confidence? Yeah.
But what I guess the thing comes back to like, what is the work required to feel confident?
The work that's required to feel confident. For me, the way that I currently think about it is like self-confidence comes from the ability to trust yourself. Can you back yourself up in particularly tough situations? And that only comes from overcoming trials, doing hard things, and proving to yourself over and over again that you can try to overreach and oftentimes fail, but at least that proves to you like where the ceiling might be. Yeah.
I think it's like that is the ultimate like internal long-term way of building trust or like confidence. I love this, like one of my favorite like little things around confidence is like the word confide comes from like to trust.
Oh.
Like is in to confide in someone, is to
Oh.
trust someone. And so confidence is the ability to have self-trust.
Oh.
Which is like quite a cool ability of, okay, it is about trusting yourself to go and do the thing that you said you were going to do.
Yeah.
And so sometimes there's like this blind belief or faith that we talked about before, this idea of why are some kids confident and other kids not?
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you know, why is there a 2-year-old that is confident and other ones not? And like, they haven't run a marathon, they haven't like owned a like 6-figure business or 7-figure business. Like they've got no evidence to be confident, but they have this belief that they are confident.
Yeah.
And that over time, potentially, the evidence that creates either makes them believe that exists still or it doesn't, whether it's falling off a tree or falling down or like a short-term memory to keep trying to do the thing.
Yeah.
It starts off with this belief. And it's like, act as if you are confident or you're confident in this situation. So it's like, okay, try and just believe it for a little bit. And then you can't exist in that domain all the time. You actually do have to back it up with some sort of evidence long term so that it does become real, or that you prove that that is what you're working on.
Yeah. Because I guess like if, like you can believe all you want, but like how do you come to trust yourself if you don't test it against reality, right? So you can fake it till you make it all you want, but I feel like that sense of confidence will always be fragile. Like you can start poking holes into it immediately. Yeah.
And sometimes people are really good at like throwing like repairing the holes as if they don't exist, as opposed to reinforcing everything in the first place and having.
It's like
It
a
exists.
shaky.
Yeah.
Like it's like building building a building on like shaky foundations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For
You're
sure.
always like patching it. Like sure, like maybe it'll stand today, but like, is that sustainable? I don't know.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's it is incredibly fascinating, the idea of confidence,
Yeah.
especially in this modern world of why it's so important to everyone and why everyone wants it, but yet there is still, I think, a big portion of the world that don't have it or don't exhibit it or don't feel like they have it sometimes, and that is where we often put our faith and influence in. I think a lot of the time.
Can you buy confidence?
Yes. I think like $1 per confidence point works.
Yeah.
I think it can get bought by, money or success. Like I like the idea that rich people or rich guys are more successful with women, not because they're rich, but because they feel more confident because they have money.
Oh.
And so from like an athletic perspective of you're not better with women because you're strong, but because you're more confident in your own physical ability.
Yes.
Therefore you become more confident.
Right.
And so it's like an external metric of where you base that on, of what do you think is the most important character to build, or most important foundation to build confidence on, and it's almost like trying to build it on something that you can't take away, now that I think about this.
Yes.
And so it's like, if you're trying to focus on money to be confident, it doesn't work. If you try to focus on physical ability to be confident, it doesn't quite work. If you try to have lots of friends or to be a nice guy, it doesn't work. But it's like, are you who you say you are in like a an ideological way, or like a morality way, or to just be a good human being sometimes? And like, do you believe you're a good human being sometimes? And like, this is how I feel, or this is the ideology I have. And to that's where you get your confidence from, which comes back to acting in accordance of what you believe.
Yeah. The thought of being able to trust yourself is very interesting.
Do you find it easy?
It takes a lot of work. My internal voice is very powerful at many times, and it's quite skeptical and critical. Yeah. So I have to prove it wrong all of the time. Yeah.
It does exist.
Yes.
I think it doesn't exist for everyone, but I feel like we're similar in the sense of that there is like this underlying negative. For me, this is my reality. You can say whether it works for you, of like whether I believe I'm confident or not, from an external perspective. Like the amount of times we've gone out to like single events recently, and I do find this story like fascinating of you talking to this girl, and you were analysing how I dressed that night. And it still is like fascinating to me because she was like a fashion person, and she was going, this guy's got like a red like varsity jacket on, which like I stand out in a crowd of like everyone wearing black and white. And, my t-shirt matches my shoes. And so she's like, obviously this guy has a level of confidence to be able to stand out in this room. And every single one of these events, I start off the night talking to you, confiding in the fact of, I got no idea why I'm even here. How do I even think? Like, this is going to be annoying. Like, I just have no confidence. And I'm always like, let's just talk to someone. Just remove the expectations. And it's like this ability to try and feel confident, even though it doesn't exist. It exists externally, looking at me, but internally it's like crumbling, almost.
Yeah, there's like the disconnect between the exterior and the interior, and I think her in that particular situation, her analysis of how you appeared externally was quite accurate. And for me, as the third party, listening to your interior stories and seeing how you appear externally, it was like a contradiction that I still can't reconcile, because from knowing you and like seeing you, how you appear, in public spaces, like I see a lot of confidence, and like hearing your track record of like conquering mountains and like doing ultra marathons and all of that, like you've got this massive track record, but there's still that internal voice that is quite strong, and like, always questioning like, am I really who I am? Like, yeah.
Yeah. It is a hard thing to navigate,
Yes.
I think. I kind of feel like the solution to that is almost like trying to find your authentic self in there.
I think, one of the realizations from earlier was around like, how do you build that confidence? And it's not necessarily like a watershed single moment where like you go from unconfident to someone who's totally like comfortable in his own skin. It's more like, as you go through life, you collect these experiences as like the building blocks that kind of set the foundation. But yeah, it takes time.
Yeah.
It takes time.
Yeah. I think at the start, the change often comes from something that is out of your control that you don't realize is a change in your perspective or a change in your behavior, until you realize in reflection that the change in behavior creates the confidence or a greater level of confidence in yourself, basically. And so when you realize that that is something that helps, then you can intentionally try and change your level of evidence by changing your behavior to become the person who you want to be a lot more of the time.
I wonder if it's like in your own experiences, like, is it active in your mind in terms of like, oh, I'm going to do this because it's going to give me confidence? I've never really thought that way, but does that relate to you at all?
I've definitely tried that in the past, of like doing experiences that makes me feel more confident. But I feel like it's doing something that I'm fearful of that makes me feel like if I can handle this situation, I can handle the next one.
Yes.
More often.
Yeah.
And so I think it was the idea of like doing debating in year 12, which was like, I was terrible at. The two guys I was with was like way better debaters, like way more orally and more like succinct to points. And the only time that I really was like, I only had one good debate, and it was a result of like, should the government fund like national sports teams or not, or like sporting athletes? And we were on the shouldn't. And like, because I knew sports so well, I was like, I can speak all day on this idea. I had the most congruent points. Everything else I just didn't care about.
Right.
Tangent, fuck. What was the point? That was. It's like, how do you find confidence? Fuck. Yeah, blank. Blankety blanks. Fuck. Anyway, where's it come from? I don't know.
Where, like, at what point did you realize that, like, you could actually do stuff to change either who you were or the conditions you were in? Like, at what point did that happen?
I think in referential awareness, it was when I first lost weight, and that came from the idea of joining a rowing club at school, which was basically going from trying not to be the last person in a 3K time trial to then knowing that I was beating a lot of guys at that point in time and had lost weight as a result of eating better and exercising more at that point. And it was probably more reality of exercise, of eating better than it was of exercising more, but that like the exercise helps. And it was also probably because I always thought I was overweight when I was young and was always like chubby since I can remember. Loved sports, but like was never good at them because I was overweight and didn't have the fitness. To the point of then like being able to change that and like people actually started to see differently or notice it, and without me even like didn't weigh myself, didn't know anything, but like pictures over time and like referential experience was like, oh, like something has changed.
Whoa.
As well as the idea of being a very big maths focused, enjoying science and maths, and then going into finding a teacher that liked English and allowed me to get better at English, or like
Right.
understand the value of like an essay and like an oral presentation, and like give me something to work on it, to just like start to enjoy and see the pattern of it as opposed to the bullshit that it exists as.
What do you think that teacher did well?
Relatability.
Oh.
I think it's he was like Mr. Murphy. He was like an old collegian, smoked, like he would go to like the back, like the shed at the back, and it's like the smoking shed. Like you can't smoke in front of kids, but like it was there.
Yeah.
And like was just really connected as like an old boy of the school, and just really wanted to connect with the guys on a guy level,
Right.
like young boys, and like as a man leading other men, and just being like trying to be as relatable as he could without like going over the top. And I think that relatability to not just being like an English teacher or proper English and that sort of stuff, but trying to probably be a mentor rather than a teacher or a director, help to go, oh, this is actually like kind of cool to be able to understand this sort of stuff.
How is being a teacher different to being a mentor?
I think it's like rather than directing you and telling you exactly what to do from a school perspective, it's more like this is a path you can take. Like walk next to me on the path is probably a bit better thing. And maybe it is more teaching the mentor. I don't know how to distinguish between the two, but it's like wanting someone that's like walking with you as like you're talking. Basically is like the picture that comes to mind is like us walking across a park and you just talk and chat, and like they're standing next to you. They're not actually doing anything for you or telling you that this is what you have to do, but you're like, okay, this is something that I want to follow. For you, where do you feel like do you feel like confidence started at a certain point, or do you feel like you always had confidence?
Did it start at some point? I would say yes. But yeah, like it took time and a lot of varied experiences to kind of like prove to myself that I was capable of doing more than I thought I was capable of. So for me, like a lot of my own journey comes from like bumping into books that kind of showed me different tools, techniques to kind of like try to improve my own life. And as I went out into the world and ran all these experiments, like they were all like just like mini milestones of like proving to myself that yes, I can stick to what I say. I can trust myself when things get hard, or I can support other people just beyond myself. And yeah.
What motivated you or inspired you to pick up that first book that shifted your perspective?
That's a great question. I should ask 15-year-old Julian, because it's very
Julian.
It's weird because like when I think back, right, like most of my childhood was spent playing games. So when I was like in primary school, I was playing games with the kids in the neighborhood. When I got into early days of high school, I was playing video games online. So I was never really someone who was like intellectually curious at all. I was kind of like going through the motions, like I'm having fun, like I've got friends to hang out with, blah, 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 but like not really having anything specific to like point myself towards. And I didn't really grow up in an environment where there were like clear or obvious mentors who I could like mimic. So when I found this book, it was like, you can try things to improve your life. I was like, really? So that got me curious. I was like, you mean I can play video games in real life? Okay, cool. Like let's try that out. So
What made you feel like you needed a mentor though? Or that like noticing that you didn't have clear mentors in life, that you're like, okay, a book might be a good mentor.
I don't think I was actively in search at the time. It was kind of like by chance that I found that book, and by chance that that book was like, it had some sort of appeal to it. Yeah, it's a big ask to read that particular book, which was 7 Habits by Stephen Covey. To go
Shit
from
book. Shit book to
gamer,
read.
like prolific gamer, to like 7 Habits is like, you know, you could have started me off on like Harry Potter or something like that. Yeah, somehow it clicked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think like there's a lot of good habits or like small parts of the book that you don't always remember, but you kind of pick up on and remember them when they come together.
Yes.
Whereas I feel like I was almost lucky when I first started to read some of the books. First one was like The Barefoot Investor, which was like trying to understand money. I think a lot of now it was like try to get my first job, try to get money, then I wanted to buy a car, and then my dad was like, oh, maybe you should buy an investment property or like save up for that. I was like, okay, well I need to invest and like figure out money stuff.
Right.
Read that book, still implement a couple of the things from there. But then like the next book was like The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. A big orange book with like the word fuck in it, and I was like, of all the books I'm gonna read, like this is the one. This is the one.
Yes.
And so it's like a very contrasting view on the world of like, I tried to read the 7 Habits before, and it's rough.
Rough. It's rough. Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, there must have been like, maybe you didn't see the book as rough at the time, but you're like, I feel like I need to read this book for some particular reason.
Yeah, I don't know how that book entered my life, to be honest. I think the realization I had at the time, though, was like, there was maybe understanding that no one was coming to save me.
Yeah.
So I kind of had to like work my own stuff out and figure out a way forward.
Yeah.
But yeah, so if I had to boil it down, there was that fear of like, hey, if no one's gonna bring the boats around, I gotta make one. I guess.
Carry the boats.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
I think that kind of comes to the idea of like surrounding yourself with a certain environment with similar sort of people or ideas, or I think it often starts with some sort of level of book or podcast or a different friend or someone around you that influences you to want something better. Was there somebody growing up in that, you know, mid-teen to early 20s to kind of influence you to go, there's something different out there?
I found a lot of this guidance through people I didn't know directly, so through books, really. Yeah.
What was the first time you came across somebody that was real, that wasn't in a book, that you're like, okay, there's something here?
Definitely a lot of like the mentors I had early on in my professional experiences of like seeing people who were, and meeting people and seeing how they operate in the world, like people who were ahead of me in the timeline, and just trying to figure out that question of like, is this someone who I would like to live the life of? And so that became the qualifying question of like whether I should follow this person or not. And oftentimes, like, and it has happened to date where I would follow this person to some extent, and then to realize at some point that, like, to have what they have, I have to accept it wholesale and not just pick and choose the elements that I liked. And whenever I had to confront that question, the answer was like, yeah, like, sure, there's many elements of their life that I respect and look up to, but I wouldn't want to be them. Yeah.
It's a hard reality to face sometimes of like,
It is.
to take on their whole life, or like that whole theory of like, or is there like only a certain part of their life or theory that you can take to create some level of success or the life that you want?
Yeah. And to be honest, when I go on Instagram and see people with many awesome cars or you know, like lots of resources, whatever. Like the thing that kind of keeps me grounded is like that question of if I can't pick and choose what they have out of the thin slices of their individual lives, I have to accept it wholesale, and that always like resets me. Like, maybe that's fine. I won't accept any of that.
How do you know what the wholesale thing is?
I
Of
don't.
like,
I don't.
okay,
Yeah. 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 But I guess if even with not knowing that, the upside is not worth it.
yeah,
I'd rather be myself.
yeah, okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
interesting. Is there a quality or something that you've taken from somebody else that you've used more often than not to kind of live more authentically in like yourself and who you want to be?
Yeah. I mean, it's many. It's probably too much to count.
What's something that like comes to your mind at the moment?
One thing I'm trying to work on currently, and one thing I'm very curious on, is like, how do I be more assertive towards the things that I want to get out of life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What makes you feel like assertiveness is the thing that is most important thing to work on at the moment?
I've come to realize that my natural way of approaching the world tends to be more passive is one word, like kind of just accepting with how things are going, not really challenging, not really voicing my own perspectives on what it might look like to me. And I realized that that is, as comfortable as that might be, there are costs to that approach, and just having a wider range of like being able to adapt to particular situations could be helpful. So rather than like just arrogantly looking at my current way of preferred way of operating, just being more well-rounded would be one way to put it. Yeah.
It's like seeing the value on being a kind person and like being more go with the flow and like adaptive with other people.
So here's one like particular moment that kind of shifted my thinking on it. There's this concept of like radical candor.
Yeah.
By Kim Scott, and she paints this framework of like there's 4 quadrants, obviously, which somehow appeals to my brain. So on the y-axis of this 4-quadrant framework is caring personally. So you care personally and you don't care personally, and then the horizontal is challenging directly. So in the quadrant where you're caring personally, but not challenging directly, is where my preferences lie. So whenever I communicate with people or work with people in a professional environment, I realize that I care personally a lot, but my tendencies tend to be on the one end of the spectrum of not challenging directly. And the quadrant that lies in, she labels as ruinous empathy, which made me realize that that way of operating has consequences that I might not even realize, but are not necessarily good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like an interesting theory because I definitely fall in like the people-pleasing mentality a lot more, and the idea of flowing with and like working with what's going on.
Yeah.
And just sort of being not putting a level of assertiveness in certain things, but like they're going with the flow. And I think it sort of shifted my perspective when I watched a video around like game theory and this long-term game of should you be kind or should you be aggressive, basically. Yep. And it was this long-term theory around over 150 sort of outcomes. Should you share with the other person? Should you take from the other person? And it was just like those 2 outcomes. And it was either that you both took, you both shared, or one person shared and the other person took.
Yep.
And it was like a point system, basically, of like 5 points if you take and the other person wants to share. 3 points each if you both share, and then you get 1 point, basically.
Yeah.
And so it was like the theory of what is the best methodology to get the most favourable outcome most of the time. And you have these things where it's like, just like take all the time, or like be kind all the time, or like for every 2 kind you might take 1, or if they're kind, you be kind. If they retaliate, you retaliate, that sort of stuff. And it was like this theory around you've got to be like, one of the general principles is to get the best outcome, you've got to be kind most of the time.
Right.
Like the world works on helping other people. And if they help you, you help them, you split, like you share it. It also is important though that if someone tries to take from you or retaliates, that you should retaliate back.
Yes.
In terms of not to the level of like overpowering them, but to a level of like almost like accepting that this is a boundary, that this is like a level of like, no, this is something that I care about. I'm not going to like overpower you just for the sake of it.
Yeah.
But to go, this is what I stand for.
Yeah.
Basically.
And that leads to greater long-term outcomes?
Yeah, more often than not.
Oh, wow.
And so I think it's like the idea of Jordan Peterson's like being a monster, but then like having control of it.
Yeah.
So that like you are a good person most of the
Yeah.
time, but like you've got the capacity to stand up and be aggressive when required.
Yeah.
For something that you care about, almost like what you're saying, and like challenge the thing when you care about it.
Like the saying from Peterson that sticks in my mind is like, a kind man is not a good man.
Yeah.
Which kind of like blew me away as well. Which goes to that point of like, yeah, you have to be assertive or let's say aggressive in situations where it is important to stand your ground, but not let that be the default behavior all of the time. Yeah.
It definitely, it helps try and navigate that, because you also realize that being aggressive all the time or assertive doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't, you kind of can get lost in your own belief system and false beliefs if you don't want to change or don't want to adapt to something different or something new, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder. I wonder at what point does, coming back to confidence, I wonder at what point does that journey end? The journey of becoming ever more confident.
I wouldn't know if it actually ends. I'd like to think it does, or I think it gets to a point where you care less about what people think. Is probably a bigger thing, and trust yourself more because you've got more reference experience in the sense of like old people just say whatever the fuck's on their mind. And so they've got like this almost confidence coming from okay, I'm at the end of my life. I don't even care what anyone else thinks, or like it's going to end soon anyway.
Right.
And so it's this level of trying to get to that point sooner when you're younger rather than when you're older. And to trust yourself more and more and take on the responsibility of who you are, I think. But I think it's like it'll always be there, and like you're always susceptible to losing confidence if you lose who you are and your ideology. Or it depends on what your confidence is based on, whether it's money, physical ability, relationships, your ability to influence other people, or whether it's like an internal moral, ideological standpoint.
I wonder, the question that just came up for me is, how do you be resilient to those changes? Because like in my head, like confidence seems very fragile. Like there's more ways of it deteriorating than becoming stronger.
I think it's like the authenticity to knowing who you are and what you believe in.
Yeah, big question.
Yeah.
Big question.
And to know that that's not going to change. would you ever want to not have to worry about confidence?
Maybe when I'm dead.
It almost comes back.
That's when the questions stop.
It almost comes back to like the journey question of like, is the journey of becoming confident and less caring what other people think the reward or the outcome? Like if you just know you're confident and in any room you go into that everyone else cares and matters what you think and isn't going to influence what's happening, that people like magnetized to you, is that okay? Or like, would you want that as opposed to someone to push back on, to like have something to like push against almost, in the sense of running marathons and that sort of stuff, is like the idea is to work on something as opposed to the outcome over time.
I think on that point of like caring about what other people think, I think the group of other people could also involve our own internal self.
Go on.
In that, maybe if we go with this direction of like confidence coming from not caring about what other people think, maybe you're truly confident when you've chosen to care less about yourself. I don't know, that doesn't quite sit right.
I think it's where you might have been going is like you only care about what you believe you care about, or like a code.
Yeah, or not caring at all.
So not caring what you think and not caring what other people think.
Yeah, what does that mean?
I think this is going to be something you give a fuck about or you care about to some level. Like, I mean, you could exist in a state of uncaring, unflappability.
Yeah.
But then, for what purpose?
For what purpose, yeah. Why are you alive?
Yeah. It's like the Goggins mentality of like, what is it? Performance without meaning or performance without purpose.
Oh.
To just keep performing whether or not there's purpose or meaning behind it or not. It's also the same of whether you care about it or not, or what opinion other people think.
Yeah.
But you've obviously got to have some sort of direction or some sort of process to try and understand what it is that you're working on, or what are you trying to articulate.
Yeah.
Like as a result.
Yeah. It's like core motivation of like, yeah, what keeps the engine running? So, in terms of what keeps the engine running, what keeps you running? Like physically running?
Feet, usually, calves, hamstrings. The fact that I can walk is probably a good thing that keeps me running.
Yeah.
Good heart.
Good engine, okay.
I think it's...
Where's the fuel coming from?
I think at the moment a lot of it's meaning.
Huh.
I think, and curiosity are probably the two bigger, more powerful motivators. There is obviously a level of proof and proving something to myself and to others, and natural motivators around an idea or motivation factor, but I feel like it's a modality that I enjoy doing, that I get value out of because of like the simplicity of it.
Right.
And it's easy to work on, and it gives you time to think in your own space and own world.
Yeah.
What keeps you running? Besides PBs and...
What keeps me running? I just enjoy it a lot, yeah. And it's something that I hope to do in like 30, 40, 50 years time, yeah.
I think it's almost like, also now that I think about it, it's to connect with people, but it's easier to find and connect people who believe what you believe a lot more, or like the ideology of wanting to see what your potential is. That not everyone that runs, I mean, in a run club wants to chase that. A lot of them just do it for a base level of fitness or like for the vibes and because it's like a thing to be done. But like there's also like a lot of people that are trying to find their own potential or explore their own potential. And so it's sort of like the likelihood of meeting someone that has that similar perspective or a new perspective in around that area exists in that space, as opposed to going out on a Friday or Saturday night and talking to people, because more often than not, the likelihood is lower, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
Yeah. I think there's an interesting element, maybe it's a little bit broader than just running, but like there's something to physical activity that requires everyone to be a participant. Like you can't really be a bystander and really be involved within the sport. You kind of have to be a part of it. So there's a element of like accountability, of like you have to have skin in the game in order to really play a part of it.
You can't buy it, you can't fabricate it, like it exists in reality. Like you can't just go out and run a marathon and not do the distance and say that you're a marathon runner. Like you've got to go and do evidence. You can't buy it, you can't get a plane, you can't get a helicopter. It only exists in that. And if you bypass the distance or say you did but you didn't, then no one actually really cares most of the time except for the world record. But then that is 99.99% of the world. And so it's only you versus who you think you want to be. And that is the only metric of why you're out there doing the thing.
It's like if we think about like what does success in running look like, it's always easy to like think about times or the objective metrics. Like everyone wants to run fast, hit the major races, be fitter. Those are the more obvious metrics. But like I feel like there's that underlying thing of becoming better at whatever it is you're spending your time on. That is like really compelling.
I think it's an easy thing to execute on that anyone can do, and that it is boring, and so there's only a select few that can stick to the boringness of it for a long period of time. That anyone is capable, and anyone can show up, and anyone can get better at it. But it's like, do you choose this thing as your idea or metric to work on to figure out for yourself?
Yeah, I think that's right.
And obviously, like there is that outcome of living up to your potential in a physical domain. Like there's a point of finding that reality, but it's also there's a space where people don't want to find their potential. They do it because they exist, because they know that someone told them that they need to be healthy, and they kind of want it to be fun, as opposed to find their potential. Or I think people who looking to find their potential find it fun and find it entertaining and stimulating, but there is also, that is in part because of the potential of what you can become.
Yeah, there's there's so many questions on like why would someone choose to take that path or not? I think an underrated thing about hanging out with like running communities in like the past couple of years for me is like it's cool to have like my own internal metrics of like what I think is possible, but there's also that element of hanging around people who are following their own sense of what's possible, but using that as like fuel for inspiration. So there's many people I've met, including yourself, of like, okay, cool, like I personally think that 42 kilometers is a little bit crazy, but there are people out there doing the thing that proves to me otherwise, that it is not crazy at all. And when I see that differential, I'm like, damn, my goals aren't ambitious enough. And it's great.
And it's sort of like this seesaw of getting put off by some people that are better than you, and that you've seen how they train or not train or do train
Yeah.
is part of the marathon process, especially with run clubs, and you see everyone and you see their times and their outcomes, and you can get caught up in the time of where they're at and what's going on.
Yes.
Versus also it's just as important to have people around to, like you said, question your potential, to like have people that have gone further than you, have gone faster than you, because you know it exists and it is there is potential there, and so that makes it easier to see that there is something different that you can change.
Yeah. Just constantly trying to prove the voice in my head wrong.
Yeah. I don't know if it's like a confidence thing, but it's like a proof. There is idea of like a scientific method of like proving something of yourself.
Right.
Is what I come back to, of like, what is the potential that you could see in yourself? And like, what is the cost of that on the day to day? Like, do you enjoy the training? Do you enjoy the process?
Yeah.
Whether or not you would actually become confident as a result, but like, does this prove who you want to be?
Yeah, there's an interesting question here of like, why bother, or like, why lean into the tension when you could do otherwise? Do you know why?
And you lean into
towards
the tension?
Yes.
Why do you lean into the tension?
Oh dang. For me, part of it feels like necessity, but I think the overarching feeling is one of like curiosity that drives me. Yeah. Well, is that the thing that drives? Okay, there's a pull and a push of like curiosity pulls me. What drives me, pushes me, is that fear of not meeting that potential. Yeah.
Where do you feel like that potential is?
I don't know. I don't know what the end point is, but I know it's not here.
And if you don't meet it, what does that mean?
Then I don't know. What does that mean? It means I'm dead.
Easy get out of jail free card.
What does it mean? Damn.
Like in 10 years' time, if like your marathon time that we did at Melbourne a few weeks ago, that's it. Like, you don't get any quicker. You still keep running, but you don't improve.
Yeah.
What would that feel like?
It would suck, but
Just not good.
not good.
Just suck.
It would suck. Then, yeah, I mean, it would suck. But what I was going to say was like, maybe then I'd adjust the target. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. But I don't think I'll stop.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
So what would entice you to keep going?
Because I have to.
Just do it. Carry the boat.
Yeah. Because otherwise life would be so boring. Like,
Yeah.
why do I show up every day to work? Well, part of it is because I have to survive. But most of it is like because it's fun.
What we covered this last time, I was like, what's your biggest fear? Why do you feel like boredom is like a big fear for you? Like to have a blank, boring life is a struggle.
Because it's so boring.
I'm just
Like,
bored, to be bored.
Yeah,
Bored.
Actually, yeah. I mean, if I could articulate it, like one of my biggest fears is like being bored. Like I'm not, and maybe boredom could look like not progressing. Yeah.
Not having growth.
Not growing. Yeah. If I'm not growing, I'm dying. Yeah.
I think there's something there that you need to be entertained or stimulated by something.
Yeah.
That like, even though you're just sitting and doing nothing is hard, almost.
Could be. Could be.
It's not as scary as what you think, just sitting there doing nothing for a day.
No. Like, as many questions as we're going through today, my mind can come up with an infinity of questions, which I'm constantly trying to deal with.
So it's like there's this constant foundation of questions
Yeah.
that keep coming through, and that is like what keeps you entertained and curious.
Yeah. I wish I could shut it off, but I can't.
Yeah. So you almost like your mind won't let you be bored.
Yeah. Somehow I manage to sleep at night. Don't know how.
That's where I don't. Because yeah, it's like working on that fear idea of something to make you like almost like kind of drives you, like pushes you, I think. Like
Yeah.
for you it's the lack of boredom, for me it's like the fear of being rejected, or like the fear
Oh.
of
By who? By what?
the world,
The world.
myself.
It's a big world.
It's probably a rejection of self, but like a lot of other people are like caring what other people think.
Right.
I think too much,
Mm.
as opposed to figuring out what is it that I want, and having developed a skill set to fit in with most crowds or most spaces, and being really chameleon-like as opposed to authentic in who I want to be and show up as. And maybe the reason why, in part, I'm like curious to explore all sorts of people and relationships and ways of living is because of that curiosity to see how other people live, and to try to fit in to understand why they live that way, or what is the value of living in such that sort of mindset.
Right.
But also the fear of being cast out to be disliked by someone, anyone, to not exist is also feels quite real. More so from, even doing this podcast, to post something like this and go, I don't think that way, or like, why would I even want to like listen to something this long, is a hard thought to put out into the world.
Right.
And to kind of, even though I know that I'll still survive and still be okay, there feels like a part of me that will be let go by somebody else, or like, no, I don't like who you are, even though it probably exists no matter which way I do it. Like whether I'm trying to be a chameleon or like do my own thing, there are still going to be people that don't like that because I'm not being authentic and confident in who I am. It's like people don't like me because of who I am, as opposed to people not liking me for who I'm not.
So what does it feel like when, in those moments where you feel closest to your authentic self? Have there ever been moments like that?
Yeah, there's moments. There's definitely moments. I think I'm definitely most connected when I'm running. I think deep and meaningful conversations, like conversations like this, are parts that I like to explore, and like the curiosity of like exploring knowledge and understanding that.
Yeah.
It's like where I'm most comfortable. Like I could go on a dance floor, but I'd much rather have a conversation about life. But also like trying to live it,
Right.
and find a meaning of certain things, or
I mean, if you can find such questions comfortable, that's a great milestone.
yeah, it's like when we have these like big questions. It's like
Big questions.
I'm not there aren't many questions that I'm afraid of, I don't think, but there are a lot of questions that people are afraid of, and probably even more afraid asking of themselves.
Yeah.
And so I think that is almost a confidence of like being able to ask questions of yourself and having to find an answer to them.
Like, there's a part of me that struggles to empathize with that, with the person who doesn't encounter questions. It's hard for me to think about that, but maybe because that's how I seem to operate, and there's always questions, yeah.
It's like comfortable in the curiosity and exploring something.
Yeah,
Without having
maybe
to-
that's a nice way to put it. Being curious about the world, exploring what's possible. And then the other part of it is like not being able to turn the voice off.
It just also doesn't help sometimes, especially when it's like quite a negative or like thing that doesn't help you to grow or to explore it, like
Yeah.
puts doubt in your mind.
Yeah.
I do like the idea of like knowing that that's not going to change and that I wouldn't want it to turn off. And so it's like, how do I sit with that voice and make it a friend and go, okay, yeah, it's valuable sometimes, but
Yeah.
also is the thing that allows me to see the world in a harder way.
Yeah.
That makes me question a lot. But also, I'd hate to have the boredom of not asking those questions or not experiencing something different.
Yeah, I think one thing I'm realizing today through this conversation is that as bad as the fear of boredom might be, it's something that I've chosen to impose on myself in that it's better than otherwise.
Yeah. Like you chose the most boring sport in the fucking world. Like running is not a interesting sport, especially from a spectator's perspective.
From a spectator's perspective, but there's a lot to it.
There's a lot to it.
There's a lot to it.
I reckon maybe we end it there and put a bow on that. I think I can confidently say that I think we went way more in depth in the confidence aspect than jumped around from episode 2 version 2.0.
Great, that was fun.
Awesome.
Episode